It's a new era for the Saints. Interim coach Darren Rizzi is going to get his first crack at being the leader of the football team coming up this Sunday against the Falcons. What is in store for the Saints now that Darren Rizzi is in control? We'll talk about that. Also, could a win against the Falcons turn things around at 2-7? Probably unlikely, but we'll get into all that right here on the Straight Up Saints podcast.
You're listening to the Straight Up Saints podcast.
What is up, Who Dat Nation? Welcome back inside another edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. I'm your host, Chris Rosvoglu, and as always, we're brought to you by Scott Ficknair Injury Lawyers. If you've been injured in any kind of accident, car, truck, 18-wheeler, or hurt offshore, Scott Ficknair handles it all. You give him a call at 504-500-1111 for a free consultation. They'll always fight for the win. So, interesting times for the New Orleans Saints. New head coach for now, interim coach Darren Rizzi, the special teams coordinator who has a ton of experience both at the collegiate and NFL level, is going to get his crack at the job here. And for that alone, we have entered a new era, right? The days of Dennis Allen being the head coach are long gone. And that is a good thing for this team because it felt like for the last two seasons, kind of stuck in neutral. And then this season, everything just goes south, right? 2-7 start. Seems like guys are checking out. Frustration boils over onto social media with players feuding. You had to get rid of Dennis Allen. And the Saints do. And that alone, for me, feels like the start of going into that new era of Saints football. On top of that, okay, moving on from Marshawn Lattimore, a move that they made at the trade deadline on Tuesday. A sign from the Saints that, hey, you know what? We're just not that good. And honestly, as much as that might hurt, for the Saints to finally come to terms with that and accept that, hey, they got to rebuild, that's the path forward. Now, they still have a lot more work to do, right? People have questions about the front office. The roster's not good enough. The cap situation's still going to be really, really horrible for next year. So it's not going to be an overnight fix. It's going to take years. We've all accepted that. But to get to the point where the Saints finally say, hey, yeah, we really have to, say we're not contenders. We got to get rid of Lattimore. And on top of it, get rid of Dennis Allen. I think that is what you need. Now, like I said, more work to be done. But it is a new era of Saints football, and whether or not it'll be worse or better than the one that came before it, only time will tell. But the energy, at least for this week, feels different. It doesn't mean the Saints are going to go on an incredible run. It doesn't mean that Darren Rizzi is going to be the answer. I hope he is, but it doesn't mean he's definitely going to be the answer. But for the first time ever, it feels like the players are really just rallying around their guys. Whether it's Alvin talking to the media, Foster Moreau talking to the media, Tyrann Mathieu spoke for a little bit earlier this week. It really feels like people are buying in to Darren Rizzi. And on the other part of it, when a coach gets fired, even if you want said coach fired, I think that it's a little bit of a wake-up call. People feel on notice, got to perform a little bit better. And there is that sense of accountability more than ever. So I'm excited to see where this goes. I don't know where it'll take us. Could have a new quarterback next year. Could have a new coach next year. Who the hell knows? But the Saints are entering a new era, and I'm really excited about it. And part of that new era, of course, is the head coach, Darren Rizzi, interim coach for now. We'll see if he ends up getting the full-time tag here. Darren Rizzi has a lot of experience, a lot of experience. Coaching at Colgate, New Haven, Northeastern, Rutgers, Rhode Island, coached with Miami Dolphins for a good amount of time. So the experience is there. The ability to be a player's coach is clearly there. Guys love Darren Rizzi. Absolutely love him. I think what Saints fans are going to like about him, if they're able to be in contention here in these games, and not contention in terms of playoffs, but being a competent football team that's competing. Because let's be real, guys, the Saints have not been competing. Yeah, last week the game was close. Good job. It was against the Panthers. Wasn't close against the Chargers. Wasn't close against the Broncos. Wasn't close against the Buccaneers. So outside of the Panthers game, they really haven't competed in over a month of action. So if this team is competitive, you are going to see guys rally around him because the one thing Rizzi brings to the table that Dennis Allen, in my opinion, doesn't bring to the table is having that moxie. And I go back to last year's regular season finale, right? Dennis Allen apologizes to the Falcons. And the Saints, you could argue that they were wrong, and I would say they probably were for what they did. I get that. Was it Bush League? Sure. But you don't, show your players up in front of the media, say what you did was wrong, and apologize to the Falcons. That's just not going to fly. Rizzi, on the other hand, was there for all the smoke. And players are always going to back up and love that shit. So I think for Darren, that's a big thing. But what I love, what he comes in and does, interim coach, sometimes it's a tough job. It's a tough job regardless. But you got to come in and command the room. And Rizzi so far this week, let's go through the changes he already made. They got a pre-practice activation period. They're hoping that's going to help them with the soft tissue injuries. That's, change number one. Change number two, making the offense and defense practice at opposite ends of the field. Switching that up for the first time. Is that going to change anything? Probably not in terms of the actual success they have, but you're trying to switch up the mojo. I love that about it. Making the players sit in different spots in meeting rooms, different spots in locker rooms. I like that. Shake it up. The players seem to really be appreciating that, at least through the first week. Maybe you'll start to realize, hey, the guy next to me is annoying the crap out of me. But for now, they're enjoying it, okay? And then the actual important changes, the real important changes, making some alterations to the coaching staff, okay? So you got Todd Grantham getting pulled from his D-line duties. In replacing him is going to be Brian Young, who's now going to oversee the D-line. And Brian Young's going to oversee the D-line over here with Coach Hodges, the linebackers coach. So you got the D-line with Brian Young being oversaw, and then you have Brian Young and Michael Hodges working on the run defense, which the run defense has been downright atrocious for the Saints for the majority of this season. Will these changes work? You don't know. You really don't know until these games go out. But I really appreciate that Rizzi, day one, week one, says we got to move some shit around because that's what you need. And speaking of those changes, that brings us to our tweet of the week here, presented by Standard Mortgage, your local lender for life. To get in touch with a home loan expert today, give them a call at 504-569-3902. I tweeted, will Darren Rizzi's changes lead to better results for the Saints? Not sure. Am I glad this franchise is finally making changes? Hell yes. And I think that's what it's all about. For the last 3 years, the Saints have pretty much been doing the same exact thing under Dennis Allen, which makes sense. You've been told just keep doing what you're doing. So the Saints, frankly, just kept doing what they're doing. With Rizzi, it feels different. You can tell the players are buying in. Alvin Kamara has been a big believer in that this week. Alvin Kamara, speaking to the media, said, Riz don't want nobody on the ground at practice. Seen somebody go down and he gets right in their face. That's just been a thing. He's going to hold you accountable. A, that seems like a shot at Dennis Allen. B, players are going to ride for him. And that matters. That so matters in a season where at 2-7, everything seems lost. And for the most part, it is, right? You're not thinking playoffs. You're not thinking Super Bowl. You're not thinking, being a 10 or 9 win team. You feel like the season's lost. To get players to buy back in again at 2-7 is important. And it seems like Rizzi's doing a great job of that. And I think for Rizzi, in terms of what are going to be fair expectations for him, I think it all depends on what everyone's realistic take on the Saints is. I don't think the Saints roster is very good right now, and I think the Saints have 2 critical injuries that are going to sink them offensively. Chris Olave missing time with the concussion, and then Rashid Shaheed out for the year. There's a realistic chance that you don't have either one of them for the rest of the season. And if that's the case, I don't know how you move the ball through the air, and obviously not having a passing game is going to affect your ability to win games. But if the Saints, you're at 2-7, you got 8 games left. If the Saints were to go 4-4, let's say, in those last 8 games, I know fans won't like it because it'll hurt the draft pick perspective. But if Rizzi's able to go 4-4 with a really, really, let's say, rough and declining roster, that's quite impressive. And the takeaway I get, and I've spoken to Rizzi before, it was 2 seasons ago, but I've had a conversation with him, and he really is such an intelligent guy. The one thing I love about him is there is kind of that Dan Campbell feel to him, where you just know the players are going to love him. You know he's going to ride or die for the guys. He's never going to throw them under the bus. He's going to be the one to fall on the sword every single time. And I don't know if Darren Rizzi will be promoted to full-time head coach. I don't know. I don't know if the interim tag will get removed from his current spot. What I can say, though, is that given his history, given the people he's worked with, I really feel like at some point he's going to be a head coach. It's just a matter of if he'll be with the Saints. That's how I feel about a coach like Darren Rizzi. So we'll see what happens. I am not vouching for or against him becoming the head coach. You got to earn it, and he's going to have 8 opportunities here to earn it. And history's kind of said when you promote the interim to full-time, usually doesn't work out in your favor. Just look at the Raiders right now with Antonio Pierce. But it feels like Rizzi is going to have these guys committed, and it all comes down to the results on the field. Ideally, if you're a Saints fan, you want this team to be competitive while still being in prime position to add a top 5 talent in the draft. That's what you should want, because that is probably for the best right now. When you fire a head coach, kiss playoffs goodbye. You got to start thinking about what is the best part for the future. And getting a good draft pick's really important for this team. That said, I do believe that in terms of fair expectations, if Rizzi can win, let's say the Raiders game, maybe one of the Browns-Falcons game, and the Giants game, I think that is actually fair expectations for him because I'm picking games where I believe the Saints will either be favored or not that tremendous of an underdog. Browns, Giants, Raiders, those should be winnable games for them. I'm not going to pick them Commanders, not going to pick them Packers or Rams. So can he go 3-5? 3-5 with a roster that frankly isn't that damn good. You show some competitive fight. You prove that there might be some moxie and skill to this coach. And on top of it, you still get a good draft pick because trust me, 5-12, you'll still be in a pretty good sweet spot despite how really rough this NFL season's been for a lot of teams. So what are your expectations for Darren Rizzi? Let me know in the comments below. We're going to get to them at the end of this show and we'll get all of your thoughts there. So make sure you guys leave your comments there and also like the video if you guys appreciate the channel that we have here and the content we put. It really, really helps out. So before we get into this game, predictions, thoughts, all that, I want to get a quick word from one of our sponsors, Scott Fickner.
And Jonathan Williams brings it all the way back from the 20-yard line.
What a terrific way to end the first half.
And tonight's game is brought to you by Scott Fickner Injury Attorneys. They always fight for the win.
You mean attorney? It's one lawyer. Scott Fickner?
No, there's two.
Brad Scott
And David.
Fickner.
Well, it's confusing.
That it is. They could have picked a better name.
Scott Fickner, Injury Attorneys, we fight for the win.
Once again, thank you, Scott Fickner, for being part of the program. We greatly appreciate it. So let's get into this Falcons game. Can it turn the season around? I guess it turns out, well, what's your definition of turning it around? If you believe the Saints are a win away from all of a sudden ripping off a really, really lengthy win streak, I don't know about that. I don't know if I can buy into that. I just think with the Saints schedule, yes, there are some winnable games. Browns can be winnable. Rams is going to be a tough one. Giants, who the hell knows? That seems like a tank bowl between these two teams. But then you're at it where you got Commanders and Packers back-to-back. You're probably losing at least one of those, if not both of those. So do I think a win can turn this season around? No. Do I think a win can help these players stay bought in for another month of the season? Absolutely. Do I think a win can play spoiler against the Falcons and make us fans feel good for at least a Sunday? Absolutely. Now, do I think it's going to happen? I think for the Saints, it's imperative you got to run the football well. You got to run the football well. And that, again, it was against the Panthers who can't stop anything right now defensively, especially the run. Saints were tremendous in the run. Obviously, Alvin Kamara over 150 rushing yards. He was outstanding. For the Falcons, though, that's going to be the key because you're not really going to do a ton of damage in the passing game. You don't got the weapons right now. And truthfully, you probably don't have the quarterback. But in terms of the run game, the Saints possibly could get something going there. And if you go to the last meeting that they had between the Falcons and Saints, the one thing I will say about that game, granted, did not go the way we wanted to at the end, Alvin still had a fine game. I thought Alvin ran the ball pretty well in that one. And again, that's another game without Eric McCoy. So I think for New Orleans, can you run the football well? Can you continue to, really have Alvin shoulder the load offensively? That's going to be imperative. But defensively, can the defensive line do something? I think what really frustrated me about the first meeting with the Falcons, Kirk Cousins, who is not a mobile quarterback, obviously had all day to throw. And as the season's gone along, Kirk's gotten more comfortable, obviously coming off that Achilles injury. Every single time you get another week of reps, you're going to knock that rust off. And Kirk's done a great job of it. And that's why the Falcons have been in a good position. Their offense has been rolling for the most part this season. I think for New Orleans, you got to find a way to manufacture pressure. I don't know which way they're going to make it happen. Is it going to be via the blitz? Is it magically going to be the defensive line playing better now that they've switched things up and they got Brian Young running the show for the D-line? Maybe that's what it is. But there have not been enough flashes from this defensive line. It doesn't matter if it's against the Panthers. Doesn't matter if it's against the Buccaneers. We are not seeing a D-line that can go out there and just wreck a game plan. So for New Orleans, it always sounds so simple, but their path to victory, and it's going to be this way for the rest of the season, they're not a finesse football team. They are not a team that's going to make the big splash plays, at least not anymore. And for them, got to run the football effectively. We know that is true, but defensively, you got to get after it in front of the D-line. Right now you got the secondary banged up. You don't have Marshall Lattimore coming back. Obviously, he's in D.C. Paulson Adebo's out for the year. And while I think Alante Taylor's been their best defensive player, it's time that guys in the defensive line step up. Is it Brian Brzee? I feel like he's a player that, to be honest, I'm expecting more from him. I think he can be better than what he's shown. And that's a player that I'd like to see have a breakout game on Sunday. Could it be Carl Granderson, who we know can step up? But lately, feels like we haven't gotten enough out of Carl Granderson. That could be because the guys across from him haven't really put in their share of work. But I do believe that is going to be the key. And as far as a win, will it change things for the Saints? Probably not. Probably not. But you have to remember, for Darren Rizzi, every opportunity that they have coming up this season is a way for him to show that he is fit for this job. And I can totally understand if Saints fans want to go in a different direction. And I can also understand if Saints fans get kind of attached to him, depending on how the next 2 months go. It's up to him and how this team responds to his coaching and his leadership. And we'll see. But do I believe a win's going to change everything? I don't. And that's just the truthful answer from me. Do I think it would be sweet for the Saints to play spoiler against the Falcons and hand them a loss when they've kind of been cruising the last couple of weeks? Absolutely. I absolutely do. And anyone who wants differently, I don't know, man. Against Atlanta, I don't care where the tank is at. You are not getting me to root for Atlanta. Absolutely not. So if the Saints, who are on a 7-game losing streak, can pull off the upset, continue the good vibes, I'm for it. And again, I don't think the Saints are going to be in a position where they lose a good draft pick. I know that's been a big concern for a lot of Saints fans. A lot of people have said, my fear is that Rizzi goes on like a 4 or 5-game winning streak and you're not picking top 10. This team's picking top 10. Spoiler alert, they're not very good. They don't have the explosiveness. So I think this would just be one of those fun wins on a Sunday against your big rival in a season where they're going to be better than you. You get to hold it over your head that you upset them. And then you're probably right back to, stacking L's in that column. So we'll see what happens. And as always, guys, I encourage you to share your thoughts. I think the opening energy in the Dome is going to be great. A lot of fans are going to be excited now that Dennis Allen's gone. And I am so interested to see how they hold up on defense without DA as the play caller now. That's going to be fascinating. In past years, I would be nervous as hell because DA has obviously been a great defensive play caller. This year, the defense just gave up a game-winning drive to Bryce Young. So how worse can it get? Guess we'll find out this Sunday. So before I get into any of your comments and thoughts, I just want to get one more word from one of our sponsors here, Theo's Pizza.
Scan the code now and tackle your hunger with Theo's Pizza, your neighborhood pizza with 5 convenient locations. Who dat? Your taste buds are about to find out.
Once again, thank you to Theo's Pizza. We greatly appreciate it. So let's get into our fan Q&A presented by Sunshine, your hometown John Deere. Nothing runs like a deer. Let's keep it. Not keep it. Let's start it with Jack saying, was listening to Adam Schefter's podcast, and apparently Adam got a call 30 minutes after the Panthers game from a credible source that said the Saints were going to fire DA. Yeah, he also talked about that on, on McAfee's show. I almost lost train of thought here for one of the ESPN personalities. He was on McAfee's, and he mentioned that too, and not really surprised. Adam Schefter's the most plugged-in insider there is. Him and Ian Rappaport, you can pick whichever one you want. I think that for New Orleans, it had to be done, right? Mickey Loomis could say whatever he wants on the radio about how he thinks DA is a fantastic coach and all that, but I think when you lose 7 games in a row, I don't care if you're tanking, I don't care what your position is, the message it would send to keep the coach around would be insane, right? That would be saying you're okay with just being the laughing stock of the league. So had to happen. Not surprised Schefter got that call. Ed says, I can see a Saints win straight off the emotion of everything that has transpired, like a Saints rout. Honestly, if the Saints had Shaheed and Olave at their disposal, I really do believe they would win this game, and I'd be confident in it. Now, they still might win. Don't get me wrong. I think the interim coach energy can never be denied. You are going to get the best effort that they've had all season on Sunday. You can guarantee that. But not having playmakers offensively is something that scares me a little bit. Because where is that offensive production coming from? If Atlanta goes into Sunday's game and says, we are taking out Alvin by all costs, we are neutralizing his production, who's stepping up for the Saints? Taysom Hill, he's a Falcons killer, sure, I'll give you that. After Taysom, where does it come from? Is it Juwan? Maybe, but Juwan hasn't really been the player we all hoped he would be maybe 2 years ago, so we'll see what happens. Justin Cash says Cam Ward on the way. I'm sure that will be one of the popular, prospects we talk about as we get close to the draft. Cam Ward. I know people will talk about Shador. I'm obviously, if I'm just going best player / add talent to this team, I would love to see Travis Hunter in the black and gold. We know he looks good in the black and gold already with what he's doing at Colorado, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But Cam Ward's definitely going to be mentioned. There's no doubt about it. Ed says the fact that Alvin called Darren Rizzi a leader just tells you how much they hated Dennis Allen. I kind of feel that way too, man. And the one thing I respect about Alvin more than anything outside the fact that he's a great player, he's very, very open and honest about how he feels. Last week he said, we have confidence in the players. Maybe we don't have confidence in something else. And obviously he was referring to the coaching staff, So I'm not surprised that a comment like that was made. And I'm okay with it, man. If you read all those in-depth stories about Dennis Allen's time here, not a lot of accountability. Not. And I've said before, Dennis Allen, good defensive coordinator. The guy's not cut out to be a head coach. And that's okay. That's okay. Spags with the Chiefs is doing his thing as a great defensive coordinator. He's not cut out to be a head coach. It happens. Big Smokey says, Saints about to win Sunday. I love the optimism. Ed says, I thought it'd be more of a fire sale. I think it would have if the Saints had more attractive trade options. You know, like the one thing that really, really hurts the Saints with their cap situation is these guys that you may want them to trade. It's not going to help their cap situation for 2025. Like getting rid of Lattimore didn't really help the Saints financially. You pretty much break even financially on that. So I think if they had more valuable assets to get rid of that would have helped the cap situation, you would have seen another trade or two, in my opinion. But they didn't really have anything to offer. You know, one guy we talked about in theory was maybe Chase Young because of an expiring contract. But what's the value for Chase Young? Hasn't really done that much this year. So I think for the Saints, that was the problem. Not having enough assets. Forgive says, with all the reports about DA coming out, do you think the defense becoming the worst unit in football comes down to them being bad or trying to get him out of New Orleans with lack of effort? I think it could be two things. I think the lack of effort stuff has come at the end of games where the defense is tired or feels like, you know, it's all on their shoulders and they just can't do it anymore. And that's normal. That's happened in the NFL. I think this is just an aging defense, and it's at all three levels, right? Safety position, you're pretty old there. Linebacker, you're old there. Defensive line, you're somewhat old there with Cam Jordan at least. And I think for the Saints, it's also a talent issue. You know, I've said Pete Werner seems to be, hopefully for them, a cornerstone defensively. Carl Granderson's been a really good impact starter for them the last couple seasons. Obviously, Alontae Taylor's been tremendous this season. But Adebo's out. That hurts your personnel. Obviously, no Lattimore, but Lattimore was out anyway with injury at the moment. I think of just guys not taking that next step. Brian Brzee is a player that I believe can be a really good player, and we just haven't seen that consistency yet. And Chase Young, a player that I thought was going to do well this year for the Saints, hasn't made that much of an impact. So I think for them, I think that part of it is a personnel issue. I don't know if they were actively trying to get Dennis Allen fired because guys have pride. They don't want to lose on the football field. I just think the team's not that good. Max says, love the changes that I've seen from Rizzi and him saying, I can't promise much. He knows the state of the team and the vibe. I agree wholeheartedly. Jack says, I want to slam my head against the wall every time I read a report about Mickey defending DA as a coach. Yeah, I think the more Mickey defends DA, the more I start to wonder, like, are the Saints going to make the move that would really shock the fan base in the offseason? Because when you start to really double down and triple down on things like this, it makes it feel like, hey, me and Gail did not agree on this decision to get rid of him. And I think it's okay to have that conversation behind closed doors. When you start airing out your laundry for the whole world to see, I don't think that's a good look for the New Orleans Saints. And I said, I commend Gail Benson for coming down and saying, you know what? We got to get rid of DA. But every time Mickey just kind of defends DA and says he's a fantastic coach and the circumstances led to it, I just think it looks a little ridiculous. I just don't get what do you gain from doing that? Max says, to be honest, looking at the schedule, only 3 games seem winnable. So we finished above 5 wins. Puking just thinking about that. That would be an accomplishment for Rizzi. Yeah, I agree. And I agree on the 3 wins thing too. I think maximum they win 3 games. Maximum win 3 games. Giants, Raiders, I think could win at least one of those. And then one of the next 2 games I think they could win. So 3 would be like the high level for me for this team. Michael says, Saints still in denial about rebuild and a lot of fans still. I don't know. I mean, I don't think you trade Marshawn Lattimore if you're in denial about rebuilding. I think that they accepted that they have to. The problem is they just don't have a lot of guys to get rid of. You know, I don't. I think that's the problem. The Saints trading players to only make their cap situation worse. There's no point, you know, and it comes back to what I said before with the defense. The Saints don't have that much valuable assets on this team, right? Outside of Lattimore, who is going to be that trade chip that they were going to get rid of? You want to say DeMario or Tyrann Mathieu so they can play for contender. What contender's trading for them right now? They're older players. They're aging players. Like, I just don't see it. So I think the Saints finally have accepted that they're going to rebuild. I just don't think they have enough talent to trade off and kind of have that fire sale. So that's kind of where I'm at. Ed says Saints should rebuild after Greed retired. This reminded me of the Knicks. They should have rebuilt after Ewing left and spent 25 years. I'm guessing you have to say Breeze, and it autocorrect to that. But I agree. I think when you lose an all-time great quarterback, as Drew Brees was, you kind of have to hit that reset button. And the Saints didn't. They started off 5-2 with Winston, and the injury happened, and that season kind of fell apart. And it was just weird for them to continue doubling down on that for 2022 and then 2023. And they pulled back in 2024, at least off in the offseason. They didn't make that many moves. But I do agree with that. Like, in hindsight, that would have been the best thing for them. They would have kind of, paid the bill and now would have gotten into a position where they can kind of ball out financially, but they really can't. Fans even know that DA was cooked after the Falcons incident. I think, apologizing to the Falcons is the worst move you can make as the head coach of the Saints. There's no doubt about it. Max has thoughts on James Hurst tea spilling. I think it's fine. It's expected, right? I think a lot of people waited for the shoe to drop, and then all of a sudden you come out with your stories. But I think it was kind of interesting that for him, you go out there and you think in the locker room after the Falcons incident, hey, he's going to get relieved of his duties, because what James Hurst pretty much said, if people missed it, a lot of the Saints players were kind of at odds with Dennis Allen with the way he handled that Falcons situation. And instead, Mickey Loomis came in and told them, Dennis Allen's your coach. And it's very rare for that to happen. And when those reports came out last season, we all thought, hey, this is a really stupid idea by the Saints. And then, go figure. Now you're in this spot anyway. Forgive says, I'm really interested to see if Clint is just a below average play caller or was DA's decision-making holding him back. We'll find out, right? We'll find out. This is a good opportunity for Clint too. For better or worse, he's gonna have to prove himself. Jack says, would you say you're a Linkin Park fan, Chris? Yeah, sure. I mean, a hardcore Linkin Park fan, no. Like, I don't listen to their new music now. I know they have a new lead singer, but like old Linkin Park, yeah. When they said today In the End was playing at practice, I was pretty hyped up about that. In the End is one of my go-to karaoke songs. So, yeah, I'd consider myself a fan. Paul says Saints don't have any DBs or receivers to win against a stacked Falcons team. I mean, DBs they do. Atlanta Taylor's been tremendous this year, but if we're talking about outside of him, yeah, not great, right? Still waiting for Kool-Aid to come back. Good news, you might get Rico Payton in the fold, and I would love to see what he can do in an extended role because he was really fun to watch in the preseason. But yeah, wide receiver and cornerbacks deprived right now at that position. Forgive says, the interim head coaching boost's coming in full effect this weekend. We'll see. Rachel says we need a fresh start. I agree with that. Jim says play Rattler the rest of the way. I will say, Jim, I think at some point, if the Saints don't plan on having Derek Carr next year, and we'll see because obviously that's a big financial commitment to make or not make. If they're not committed to him next year and they want to get rid of him and just eat the dead cap and all that, at some point this season, they should say, hey, Derek, you're just not going to start. And we're going to go with Rattler or Haener. Either one, don't really care who they put in. But I wouldn't be playing Derek Carr if at some point they decide we're not keeping him next year. So then what's the point of playing him right now? So I would be cool with that. Jack says, thoughts on the Ravens-Bengals matchup? I'm hoping for another shootout, kind of like the first one they had earlier this season. Kind of a do-or-die game for the Bengals, right? A really big do-or-die game for them. It's kind of odd because I feel like every game for the Bengals the last month has been a must-win for them. But, 4-5, you get to 5-5, you feel good about where you are. You only be a game back of the Ravens. On the flip side, man, if you lose and you're at 4-6, Steelers are already doing well in the division. Ravens would have the sweep over you. It's just hard to see a path to the playoffs in that situation. So I think it's going to be a great game. I'm excited for it. Two of the better quarterbacks in the league. Hopefully it lives up to it. Rachel says Riz will never tank. Yeah, I mean, the interim coach is not going to tank, obviously. I mean, he's trying to earn the job, but I just don't think this roster is good enough for them to win a lot of games. I think they could win maybe 3, but I just don't think they're good enough to win a ton here. Too Short says, we'll end the season with a top 6 pick in the draft. That would be my guess as well. I don't think they have the talent to go on a run here. They can have some fun, but I just don't think they'll go on a run. Paul says the Saints need a new coach with new ideas that's not associated with the organization. Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think for Rizzi to get the interim tag removed and him be the head coach for next season, they would have to do things I can't imagine them doing, like winning 5 out of the last 8 or 6 out of the last 8. And then maybe you have a conversation, and it depends how they look, right? You got to win and look good. It can't just be ugly wins. But I think for New Orleans, the most important thing they can do for their future is really move on. Move on from that Sean Payton regime and start anew. And we'll see if they do that. Paul says Cam Jordan gets more action in front of the camera than on the field. He does. He does for sure. Jeff says, let the tank commence. Jim says, reset. Embrace the tank. Rob says, I hope Rizzi benches Carr and bubble wraps him for release. We'll see. I'm telling you, I think it's something that the Saints should consider. If they're not bringing him back next year, have the conversation at some point where you just play one of these younger quarterbacks. You know, if your O-line's healthy, that'll be a little bit better for them. Obviously, weapon-wise isn't great, but I think it'd be a decent idea for them to consider if they're not bringing him back. Jim says, true Saints fans, who feels good about this season? What the F? Feels good about the season? No, absolutely not. Obviously, I don't feel good about the season. I feel good about this week because they got rid of Dennis Allen. And they finally accepted that they're going to rebuild. And by rebuilding, getting rid of Marshawn Lattimore was a start. So I feel great about this week, Jim. I don't feel great about this season. I feel just disgusted by this season. They're 2-7. But I feel great about this week for the Saints. I think this is the first time in a long time that kind of looked in the mirror and said, you know what? It's time to make a change. Jack says, thoughts on the Kendre Miller DA situation. So if you guys haven't read it yet, Ross Jackson put out a really great story with really great reporting about how Kendre Miller was placed on IR, and the Saints, Kendre Miller and people in the building felt like he didn't need to go on IR. They felt like, you miss a week, maybe 2, and he's back in action, but he's got to miss 4 games because he was placed on IR. Now, why was he placed on IR? The belief is that Dennis Allen did it out of frustration. And we know there's bad blood between DA and Kendre Miller. DA has not been pleased with Kendre Miller from a health standpoint. But to put him on IR, you hurt your team now. You hurt your team. Kendre Miller would give this offense a boost. I think Kendre Miller down the stretch can be big for the Saints this year if he could just stay healthy. But to kind of put a player on IR out of spite, or at least that's what it seems, that is quite frustrating, man. Quite frustrating. Ed says Miller got sabotaged. I agree. Jerry says, hey, Chris, what's up, Jerry? Jim says, you could eat next year at Waffle House next to Rizzi. That is my thought about him being a head coach. I mean, we'll see. He'll be on someone's coaching staff, obviously, probably, again, as a special teams coordinator. But, he's got 8 games to try and prove them wrong. But for interim coach, it's so tough because, the history doesn't tend to side with the interim coach being the guy. 504 Coach says they have Shador getting mock tests at 5. I don't give a damn about this season. Time to look ahead. I think after the Falcons game, my mood will change a little bit. I mean, my mood has already been towards, hey, let's get the Saints some talented young players because Lord knows they need it. But yeah, I think watch the Falcons game. Maybe they play spoiler, and then we're back to tankathon, as we like to say. MB says, sorry, the Saints won't beat the Falcons, especially without Olave. It's tough. Not having, offensive skill players is tough. No Olave, no Shaheed. Obviously now no Lattimore. He's not part of your team. Kool-Aid McKinstry's still injured. Adebo's hurt. So, at those really important positions, you're lacking. And that's probably what will be their undoing on Sunday if they end up losing. Too Short says removing Mickey as GM would shock the entire league. Yeah, it would be a stunner. Absolute stunner. Will it happen? I don't know, but it would be something. Rob says it will increase with the chances that Gale is going to kick Mickey upstairs after the season. Look, I didn't think it was possible, but as the defiance continues to hit the timeline, you start wondering, will there be a move? It's possible. Ed says off topic, the Ravens uniforms tonight, fire. Yeah, I mean, those are pretty interesting. I don't know how I feel about the helmet logo. Maybe I just got to get used to kind of the purple helmet there, but I'm a fan of the NFL trying different things when it comes to uniforms, so I'm all for it. Horrible thing that happened to Kendre Miller. Talk about sabotage. Didn't realize Dennis Allen was that slimy. I figured he was when Trevor Penning got benched and everyone found out from an article, not from, the Saints releasing it. I thought that was kind of nasty business because it obviously came from him, in my opinion. Jim says, I disagree. We can't rebuild with Lattimore. We need to rebuild with youth. Yeah, absolutely. Making that trade was the first step towards getting towards the rebuild. I agree. Rashad says, hey, Chris, how do you feel about Shador? Everyone seems to hate him just because he's so popular. I actually think he's QB1. I mean, I personally like Shador as a prospect. Again, as we get closer to the draft, I'll get into more of the specifics about his game of what will and won't translate. But I've liked Shador for a while. I've been watching him for the last 3 seasons. And, it's tough to get the evaluation when you watch him at Jackson State because you're thinking, oh, it's a competition thing. But I think Shador is a good quarterback. The one thing I love about him is the eyes are always downfield looking for the pass. And that is important. That's something you're going to need, obviously, at the pro level. Is he good enough to be a franchise quarterback? Only time will tell. But I like Shador. If the Saints were to draft Shador, I wouldn't be upset about it at all. 504 Co says, Mickey got to go. His days are numbered. He is real goofy. Make Drew, Kai, or Gruden the GM. My guess is Kai Harley would probably get the GM job if they were to make a move. Kyle says, my head coaching candidates are Mike Vrabel, Darren Rizzi, Bobby Slowick, Joe Brady, and Jesse Minter. Decent mix. I'm kind of out on Slowick right now. I think Slowick's kind of tanked his stock a little bit. I just don't like watching Texans offense. Granted, their O-line has been a problem, but I just think he'd be Pete Carmichael 2.0 with not using enough motion. That would be my concern for them. Rob says the only game that I see them being a win are the Raiders. Probably. They'll probably be favored. MB says John Gruden as next coach. Fire emoji. I mean, I personally don't want Gruden because I want the Saints to start with a new idea, but who knows? I wouldn't be shocked if they interview him. DJ Trauma Gaming says I'll go Sunday because it's the Falcons, but not go anymore until they fire Mickey Mouse Loomis. Michael says Saints 10-7, win the division and the Super Bowl. Not going to happen, but I love the optimism. Kyle says hopefully Loomis steps down and resigns from GM. He is responsible for promoting DA to head coach and the atrocious drafting with horrendous draft evaluations and the depth of the roster as well. We'll see. I know the pressure's going to turn up, man. The pressure's been turning up, so I think we'll continue to turn up. Hopefully Loomis steps down for our next GM. It should either be Kai Harley or Jeff Ireland. Hakeem says, I think if we stay top 5, then go best player available. You do that instead of ruining a good young quarterback. If you don't love the quarterback, you don't take the quarterback. If you love the quarterback, you take the quarterback. That's kind of where I'm at. I think that New Orleans is going to be in such an interesting position because to your point, Hakeem, they need talent everywhere. So ideally, you just, if they could get the number 1 pick, obviously that'd be great. But they need talent everywhere. So I'm not really worried about it yet. Whoever they add, it'll be at a need because they got a need about every position. Rosenfield 10 says in a dream scenario, Mickey Loomis moves on from GM and the Saints get a player personnel guy from the LA Rams. I don't know how they do overall, but their draft hits have been great lately. Yeah, their draft hits have really changed the franchise in terms of going from Super Bowl to like a catastrophic collapse, which is where I thought they were heading, to now where when healthy, they're a really competent football team. They've clawed back to 4-4 after starting 1-4. And, I know a lot of it is with quarterback and coach and Stafford and McVay are a great duo, but got to give credit to their young guys on their team and the way they played. They've done a really, really good job for them there in LA. So we'll see. We'll see. 8 games left. I think the Saints offseason is going to be a fascinating one because outside of the coaching search, they are really going to have to go heavy on a youth movement. So maybe that's accumulating picks. Maybe that's trading back to get more. I don't know what it'll be, but it is going to be fascinating times. But before we get to any of that, we got to get through the rest of this regular season. So we'll see what happens this Sunday when the Saints take on the Falcons, the first game of the interim coach Darren Rizzi era. We'll see if the Saints started off with the win. Lord knows it'd be pretty cool to play spoiler against the Falcons. Regardless of the result, we'll have our halftime show powered by 4D on Sunday here at Boot Crew Media, and also our post-game live stream where everyone can come in, share their thoughts as we always do. We go for about an hour to an hour and a half, and I'm sure that won't be fun depending on the result, especially if the Saints get an upset win over the Falcons. But that's going to wrap it up, guys, for this edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. I want to thank you so much for leaving your comments, your thoughts, all that. You guys are greatly appreciated as always, and I can't wait to talk to you guys in the future. Moving to Sunday, Straight Up Saints podcast, the destination for the Who Dat Nation.